Well, we're thrilled now to be joined by Hamish McKenzie, one of the founders of Substack, and Lionel and I both have to declare an interest. Lionel, do you want to confess your subscriber numbers?
292.
208. Well, it's something we've got to all start somewhere. Anyway,
I've just seen somebody else has signed up, even as you were speaking.
293. It says breaking news. Anyway, Hamish, you've got two of your loyal. What do you call us? Well, you're right. Publishers, writers,
readers, subscribers. Sure, you're
anyway,
above.
We're very pleased to be on you. What was the turning point? I mean, what suddenly led Substack to take off?
Well, it's had several turning points, I guess. But really, for me, we've been at this for 7.5 years, about that. And for us, the progress has been pretty steady and consistent. And just over time, those numbers tend to build up. But in recent months, there seems to be more public attention on Substack. And I think a lot of it is driven by the app starting to generate real network effects. So people are learning that Substack is not just a email newsletter platform, but an app you can go to find the best voices in culture and have direct relationships with them, whether that's in video or audio or text. And the network effects of there being a place that people go to connect with writers and creators in this way, generating more interest and more attention.
So it's what we always thought was going to happen to media. It's a massive fragmentation of media, and at its best, it's wonderful. I mean, there are so many people to read there. Is the problem that once you start adding up, 4, 5, 6 subscriptions, it gets quite costly?
Well, I think that's a problem for the media nerds among us who tend to be subscribing to a lot of things at once. But from our perspective, most of the world still hasn't heard of Substack. They still don't have one Substack subscription, one subscription to a writer. And then the second problem is maybe they don't have two. So I think there's a long way to go before we have a serious issue to solve with the overload problem. But for those of us who already subscribe to a lot, I could see some elegant solutions at some point down the track where maybe you can start to solve the economic pain of it with some form of bundling that still respects the direct relationship between the publisher and the audience, which is the fundamental thing not to mess up for the platform. The Substack should not mediate the relationship between those two parties. We should not become like a Spotify or a Netflix. We should honor the ownership and the agency that the publishers and the subscribers have.
What's the beginning and the end of your responsibility as publisher? I mean, for instance, do you have a duty to moderate and keep the place decent, legal, honest and truthful, or is that the responsibility of the writer?
Well, I actually think the Substack is not a publisher, we're a platform. I know there are various opinions on these questions and they're still being figured out in the world. But Substack is a platform for publishers to build their media businesses on or their media properties. And we give them the tools to moderate their own communities and set their own standards. And we try to give the audiences their own tools to set their own, the terms of their own experiences as well, which, we're only at the beginning of. There's lots of work to be done. But in saying that, we do have some responsibilities as well. We do have our own content guidelines that we enforce against to protect the platform at the extremes. And we run the platform in that sense pretty much in line with the First Amendment in the US, which is you can have freedom of expression, but you can't incite people to violence, you can't spam, you can't dox people, and we also don't allow porn. So that's something we take action against. But I think what the question gets at is we're coming out of a generation, or maybe we're still in it, where people are trying to solve the problems of discourse through more intense and more careful content moderation. And they're spending billions of dollars to try and prosecute this approach. But it's not really getting us very far. If misinformation is your concern, for example, problems surrounding misinformation have not gone away despite the billions of dollars invested in content moderation. But our approach is not to obsessively try to fix this issue through just investing more and trying to make a slightly better content moderation apparatus than that built by Facebook or Twitter, but instead to look at it at the system level, to change the rules of the system, to change the types of behavior and content that get rewarded. And when you build a system that is based on nurturing relationships rather than exploiting attention, then I think you can get a different kind of cultural outcome.
I want to dig a little bit deeper into that, Hamish, but I think our listeners would be fascinated to hear a little bit more about yourself. You're Australian, I think.
Not quite, but close enough.
But how did it start? How did you get into
just emitted a gross
New Zealand?
An egregious crime.
So, yeah.
Yes, Hamish. There are many Hamishes in Australia.
That's a grovelling apology. It's no wonder you've only
just grovelling.
292 subscribers.
Yeah. Well, I got 291 now because he's just...
I'm gone. Yeah, no, that's it. And half of the New Zealanders on your list. So that's probably 290 and
we
half.
can rephrase that. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay, who am I? I'm a former journalist. I grew up in New Zealand. I live in the United States now. I'm based in San Francisco. Got a wife and 2 kids. And I was a fairly middling journalist. I have a master's degree in journalism. I'm a big believer in journalism. It was the only job I ever wanted to do since high school. I took a bit of a sidestep around about 2014 when I went to go work for Elon Musk at Tesla. He hired me to go and be what turned out to be the lead writer there. I thought it was going to be like an in-house journalism job, telling the story of this incredible company and a really pivotal time in its history. But turns out it's a difficult place to work, especially in the communications team. And so by the start of 2015, I was out. I wasn't laid off, but it was actually going in that direction. And it turns out they changed their mind. But I got excited about leaving to go and write a book. And while I was writing this book, I worked part-time.
What was the book about?
It's about how Tesla catalyzed the electric car revolution. It's called Insane Mode. It came out in 2018. But when I finished, while I was writing the book to pay the bills, I took a part-time job in the communications team at a messaging app called Kik. It was a Canadian company, kind of the opposite culture to the Tesla culture. And they had hundreds of millions of users. I was excited about them because I thought they could be kind of like WeChat, which the big Chinese messaging app, which is the world's largest and most successful consumer app, or arguably. And while I was at Kik and while I was writing that book, I became friends with Chris Best and Gerard Sethi, who are the co-founders of Substack with me, which we started in 2017.
And the idea was to somehow produce a more sophisticated platform for individual writers. I mean, just to understand the thinking about how you were going to differentiate yourself from other platforms.
Our idea was to try and, this sounds grandiose, but to try and...
Oh, try me.
Yeah, try and fix the problems in the media system that were creating bad cultural outcomes. So actually, it literally started because Chris had written this essay that he shared with me from my feedback that he intended to publish on his website, but never got around to publishing. And in this essay, he was decrying how the social media companies' incentives were leading everyone, including the mainstream media institutions that were downstream of them in terms of discovery, to bad behaviors. Because these platforms, like Facebook was the dominant one at that time, Twitter was pretty big as well, were forcing us to play a game where we were rewarded for shouting at each other and seeking attention and doing attention-seeking behaviors generally. And that served their business models very well, but it didn't serve us as humans very well. It didn't reward the seeking of truth. It didn't reward the seeking to understand each other. And so he wrote this essay describing these problems and sent it to me, and my feedback was, great essay, excellent points. Everyone who works in the media knows that these are the problems, but what they don't know is how to fix it. What's a potential solution? So if you're going to finish this essay, at least include a couple of paragraphs suggesting an alternative.
Good editing.
Thanks. And so he never got around to finishing the essay because he got caught up in that problem, and he's a great systems thinking product guy. And his realization, or his sort of hypothesis, is that you need to change who the customer was. So instead of making advertisers the customers, maybe you need to make the audiences the customers, give them the ability to pay the people who they trust directly. And even better if that can happen in a subscription relationship, because subscriptions could be a rough proxy for a trust relationship. And so we had the idea to make it really simple for any writer to start a subscription publication. In this first instance, it was an email newsletter, and take all the hard stuff, or take all the fiddly stuff off the table for them, so they don't have to think about the tech, they don't have to think about the business model, they don't have to think about the design, etc. They could just spend all their energy focusing on the journalism or the editorial work. And, if they were doing everything right, then maybe money could just magically appear in their bank account after they've hit a button. And so we set up the first instance of that in 2017. We convinced Bill Bishop, who writes about China, to come and be the first customer, the first publisher. And it worked right away with him. And we thought, well, if it can work for him, maybe it can work for a few others who are not the same kind of profile. And it did work for a few others who are not quite the same profile as Bill Bishop, writing for an audience that was business people and policymakers, etc. And then we thought, well, if it can work for this diversity of writer types, then maybe it could work for many more and could become something quite interesting. And so we built up from there.
And why is it called Substack? Let's remind everybody.
Substack was a domain name that was relatively affordable in 2017. It cost a couple of $1,000. We thought it sounds kind of like a technology stack for subscriptions, or a stack of subscriptions. It could sort of be justified in that way. But it was also like a name that was not that easy to make fun of. And these things are like quite hard to get into a row. And so we thought that's good enough for us.
So just to go back to Alan's original question, which is the takeoff point. Am I not wrong that people are so fed up with Twitter, and the sewage and the insults, that your rise has almost coincided with big questions about that particular platform?
I think it has coincided with that, but that might be coincidence. Or with that particular platform it is. Because Substack is a response to misgivings about social media generally. And Chris and I felt it, and we convinced Gerard to join us very early on. He's the third founder. Chris and I felt it in mid-2017. And then a backlash, to our surprise, happened pretty quickly afterwards against Facebook. And then there's been backlashes against Instagram and Twitter, etc. But this has happened not necessarily because of who's running the platform, but because of their business models. And when they're playing this attention game, then they have to become more and more like TikTok, because TikTok is the ultimate at that game. And that creates a different kind of outcome and a different kind of culture on those platforms when it comes to discourse and media and journalism. And so for us, it has genuinely been a steady rise. I think, though, it's happening now because we've grown to this point of a critical mass in this moment, in this political and cultural moment. I think there is a great readiness of
And what does critical mass mean?
Well, millions of users who are actively
Several
on
million.
Substack. So there's more than 5 million paid subscriptions on the platform. There's many tens of millions who have an active subscription of any type. You might be receiving the posts by email, reading them on the web.
Just to go back to my question, and you make the distinction between being a platform and a publisher. I'm Tommy Robinson, and I start a Substack, which is fairly inflammatory against Muslims and is pumping out misinformation. What do you do about me?
With the caveat that I'm not that familiar with Tommy Robinson, except on a meme level, we would let you publish until you contravene the content guidelines. And if you don't, then we let the audiences choose who to trust.
Okay, so how many moderators? You don't have no moderators, do you?
We have a moderation team, yes.
How big is that?
We don't talk about the size of that kind of thing, but it's relatively small compared to all the operations that have come in history. And the reason is not because nothing ever bad is ever published on Substack, but because the system encourages, the system design encourages different types of behaviors. And so I think people would be shocked to learn how little content moderation is needed in the Substack system, because the resulting culture from that incentives design is so much different from the other places. We've learned the last decade of social media in particular has sort of taught us a skepticism about how people behave in online discourse, because those are systems that are set up with rules that don't necessarily reward trust, but do reward a whole lot of other things that corrode trust.
So you're saying the Tommy Roberts of this world, if they turned up, they wouldn't get very far because the kind of people who are attracted to Substack don't want that kind of content.
Well, I think there are people like Tommy Robinson who could probably do quite well from the model, but I think they are really products of the other models. The systems that reward the kind of grandstanding and performative outrage and conspiracy theory type of mindset. And in the Substack model, it's not to say we're totally immune from those. Substack is still connected to the other social media platforms because people are there as well and using them to grow their audiences sometimes. But it is a massive step forward from those places, and it's a place to start building from to hopefully supplant those other places, or at least reduce the vice grip on culture that those places have. But that sort of thing it's a long-term project. It's not going to happen overnight.
So you've got lots of competitors who've looked at your success now. There are places like Ghost and Beehive, Patreon maybe as a competitor. What's your distinguishing USP that keeps you ahead of the competition?
Yeah, those places, I salute them all, especially Patreon. They proved that people are not just going to be willing to pay for content online, but they're willing to support their favorite, almost trusted artists or creators, journalists. And that's a massive contribution to history. But Patreon, although it's trying to make changes on this front, the others as well, they don't really have a network effect. They're not places you go to fall in love with culture or find a new voice. Substack has a network effect, and in that case, we're not really looking at those places as competitors. We're cheering them on. We want them to succeed because that's empowering individual independent voices. But we look at something like YouTube as something that we aspire to, not necessarily because of the exact design of YouTube, but because it's a place where you can go to publish and you can make money on the platform and you can find an audience and grow an audience. And YouTube is different to Substack in some ways. It's very focused on video. It's still mostly focused on either platform subscriptions, which is YouTube Premium, or advertising. And it still controls the relationships between the publishers and the audiences. And we would, on YouTube, the best you can have is your own YouTube profile. You don't have your own space where you have true ownership like you do on Substack, where you own a relationship with the audience and you own your content and you can export that anytime you want. That's what the Substack promise is all about.
Would it be fair to say that it's quite difficult to search? The discovery feature is not great. And if so, what are you going to do about it?
The search feature could stand to be improved, but we are working on that, and we're aware that it's not as good as it could be.
It's all right. I found Lionel Barber at Substack.
Was it yours?
80117.
Well, to search within the great richness that is Lionel Barber, then that's a problem.
Yeah, there's much to do on the search front. I do think, though, the discovery is actually pretty good, even with some broken features. If you're spending any time at all hanging out in the Substack app, you'll quickly be exposed to a collection of minds who are trying to sell you on their own brilliance in the hope that you might be led into a deeper relationship with them. And there's also a recommendations feature, which is not the big Substack machine recommending what you should read next, but the writers and the creators recommending each other and suggesting, if you trust me, maybe you want to trust this person who I trust over here.
I can thoroughly recommend Lionel Barber. So your old boss, Elon Musk, tried to buy you?
That's right.
And why did you say no?
The ultimate reason is that
You worked for him.
Well, that was an influencing factor. It's not the work environment I'm eager to jump back into. But the ultimate reason is that what he is building with X, it was called Twitter at the time, is a different kind of game to the game that we want to play. We're trying to build the new generation of a media ecosystem that can really serve the interests and the agency of all the publishers within it and all the subscribers within that too.
How much did he offer you?
We didn't even get to that point.
He just said no.
We said well, we didn't even need to say no. We just said, we don't want to talk about that right now because we're about to launch this thing called Notes, which is the main feed of the Substack app. And he wanted us to rush and make a decision about whether or not we wanted to join forces with them. And he even was talking about making Chris, my co-founder, the CEO of Twitter. And we weren't about to make that decision in an afternoon. So we're like, hold on, we're going to launch this thing. And we launched Notes the next day. And he just saw that as a declaration of war against Twitter, essentially, which it definitely was not. And went about trying to.
But it must have
Substack.
been quite tempting because you've yet to turn a profit.
We're very focused on network growth, which is why we're not trying to turn a profit right now. That is within our reach if we did decide to do it. We just had a profitable first quarter, for example, almost by accident. We weren't trying to be profitable, a cash flow positive first quarter. There are some.
By the way, I just want to interrupt here that, Alan is the one who says on every other podcast that it really doesn't matter if you're profitable, especially if you're the Guardian. So, I mean, this is off the charts, a bit way to go from my co-host here.
I wasn't reading skepticism into the question. It's an honest question.
No, I'm just staying up for you, Hamish.
Yes, thank you very much, Lionel. 292 subscribers. Okay, the thing that was tempting about it, to be honest, is that Twitter has a big network effect with people who care about culture and care about discourse hanging out there. And on the face of it, it kind of would make sense to have this big short-form discussion platform attached to the place where there's thoughtful, long-form discussion and discourse. But ultimately, we think that the two don't really play well together because the business model that underpins Twitter is encouraging different behaviors and is a different kind of business that focuses on advertising. And our business model is not focused on advertising at all. There's none in the system. We're focused on direct subscriptions.
But it's also just such a different experience as a writer. I mean, if you're doing Twitter, even though they've expanded beyond their limited wordage, if you're writing on Substack, you really do feel, that you're writing a sort of editorial. I mean, it's a sort of more considered, not knee-jerk kind of creative experience. I speak only having done 5 columns, but
each one.
I'm just saying it is very, very different. I wanted to kind of zoom out for a moment. I mean, in terms of your impact on the media landscape, yes, you're going to, I think, have more reflective, responsible, for the most part, output. But this is also going to generate increasing fragmentation, is it not? Because individuals, it's all about your individual brand. And if I was a sort of traditional, running my old news organization, it was hard enough getting people to watching what they were going to say on Twitter. But if they said, I'd like my own Substack column, I'd be going, well, hold on, what about the FT? So it seems to me that we are moving more in the Substack direction of individuals as opposed to collectives. Is that the way you see it?
Well, I think that's a big part of it, but I don't think it's the whole story. I think that as a platform, Substack can host a diversity of models. And some of those are going to be individuals who want to go directly to their audiences. They feel like they can have more editorial freedom that way or make more money that way. They just are really excited about that particular model for themselves. So Paul Krugman left the New York Times recently. He's having a great time going back to his sort of bloggy roots, doing some Substack lives, the live streaming video conversations, and doing very well both financially and in terms of a large audience to address and editorial freedom. But I do think this model also supports new institutions. And so you see things like the Free Press, which was started by Barry Weiss, or Mehdi Hassan's Zateo, or the Bulwark, which is started by a group of Never-Trumpers, the Ankler, which is Richard Rushfield's thing covering the business of Hollywood. There's a bunch of these new institutions that can start. And there's nothing about the structure of Substack, which is this network that is kind of like a subscriptions machine, and a publishing system, which is a beautiful CMS and way to distribute audio, video, text, and a payment system to facilitate direct subscriptions. There's nothing about that package that would prevent the next FT being built on the platform, or the next Guardian, or the next New York Times. So these things might look different. They might be cut up in different ways. But I think the way I think about it is that Substack is like new land to build on, and there's going to be a diversity of models. We already see it to some extent, despite being relatively new as an ecosystem, and despite those network effects only just getting started, really.
How is AI going to impact Substack? I mean, you're going to have Tesco suddenly create their own newspaper and go on Substack.
I don't think that would do very well on Substack. Every
little bit
Tesco Express, AI. I always feel a bit guilty about this because I have a fairly optimistic view about how AI is going to affect this whole system.
We're an optimistic podcast. That's okay.
Very good. I think AI can give real superpowers to writers, creators, publishers, and can give you sort of, for example, the kind of production powers for your video show that you previously would have required a whole studio to make. And I think it's going to have a huge effect on the economy writ large, but it is going to place more of a premium on the human-to-human storytelling relationship. And so you can look at this already in Substack. Like, social media has created an overabundance of content. And the biggest category on Substack is politics. And it's not like you don't get enough politics from social media, or politics coverage from social media, or even the traditional news institutions, or just generally bloggers, etc. And yet people still go to Substack to subscribe to their favorite writers in politics because they want their human take, knowing that it's going to be messy sometimes, knowing that there are going to be errors sometimes. And in fact, maybe the errors and the mess and the woolliness of it is actually a feature because you're in dialogue with a real human mind there. And I think we're just sort of intrinsically like that as humans. We're social creatures, and we're going to have a system here that can update itself a little bit more, is a little bit less rooted in like official narrative and official voice, and is not just seeking the perfectly crafted opinion piece or analysis or piece of art even, that the human involvement in it is going to be really fundamental and valuable.
What features have you got in the pipeline? New features for trusted contributors like Lionel Barber on 292.
Yeah. What features?
You make it sound as though I'm some bus. Lionel Barber on the 292.
Sort of a very high class bus. Probably a double decker in central London.
New Boris bus.
New features. Well, our focus is on constantly developing and improving the network so that people can address new audiences and find a way to grow their own Substacks. So if to the extent that the network is a feature that's required, that's taken a lot of our focus at the moment. But the video features are also top of mind for us. This Substack Live feature I briefly mentioned before allows you to go live on a video call from your phone where you can be in conversation with someone. And it's kind of the lowest friction way to do a video podcast or a video show, because you can do that call. Like, it might be a 30-minute discussion. I might be live with Lionel. We talk about whatever we want to talk. Our faces are visible. People can like and comment as they are listening and in real time.
This is what Jim Acosta is doing.
Jim Acosta does this every day at 4:00. And then at the end of that conversation, the app automatically presents you with a series of 4 or 5 highlight clips with the subtitles baked into them. And you can just push go, and it sends them off into whatever social network you want them to be distributed around. And you get the video artifact at the end of it, which you can push publish on, and you have an instant kind of video podcast or video show and episode. And there's lots of room to take that. So we're spending a lot of time like focusing on the details there, trying to make it better and better, trying to make it higher quality as a piece of media. So an AI at the moment comes in after you've finished that conversation and cleans up the audio, makes it crisper. And I think we can do the same with the visuals. And there's much more to do in terms of how many more people can participate in one of those conversations, etc.
Are you saying that Media Confidential should be on Substack?
100%. This would be far more engaging as a Substack live, I think.
Looking at our producer. Look, she's looking.
Just do it through your phones.
What's your key metric? Is it the number of writers, number of subscribers, revenues? I mean, what do you...
Ultimately, our key metric is the revenue that publishers are making. That's happens to be the revenue we're making as well, because
you get 10%.
We just get 10%. It's the only way Substack makes money. And so we focus a lot on how are they doing? Are the writers succeeding? Are the publishers succeeding? And that keeps us very honest as well, because it makes us design the platform in such a way where we have to be in service to the publishers rather than aggregating them and seeking to decide who gets to win and who gets to lose.
And what keeps you awake at night? I mean, all technologies eventually get overtaken. What do you see out of the corner of your eyes that you think need to be careful about that?
Well, I don't think Substack's advantage is technological. I think our core product is actually the business model. And that as long as the business model stays constant, where the subscribers can vote for the culture they want to flourish by paying the writers and creators directly, where the writers and creators get to own their relationships with their audiences and can export them at any time, and where the platform, Substack, can only succeed when they succeed. As long as those things stay firm, then I feel very good about Substack's future. But the things I worry about are how do we build and run a company in a quite challenging environment to do that? And we're relatively young. We're sort of coming up on 8 years now. But for the first couple of years, it was just 3 of us. We've had to grow through a pandemic. There's been an interesting economy to contend with along the way. And we're still trying to figure out this game. Like, how do you build a company like this? And now AI is coming into the mix and changing how companies get built. And that's really complicated and challenging every day. So that's the thing I worry about.
My fun question is, because it's not often we get the big boss in here, what tips can you give Lionel to improve his audience share? Because at the moment he's languishing, as we've discussed.
Well, Lionel is doing
on about it, but what's he doing wrong?
I'll focus on what Lionel is doing right. He's not waiting around and just trying to make sure everything's perfect before he goes. He's just going and he's getting feedback from people and iterating in response to that, I imagine. I think he should be fairly frequent and not worry about too much.
I think he does it once a week. Is that enough?
No, I had a 5-week break because I was helping some
Substack.
Yeah,
but I'm coming back.
Yes, okay. I advise on not taking 5-week breaks. If you could be
rank amateur.
If you're more frequent than once a week, it's probably helpful. It helps to build a consistent habit in people's minds. And I think you should not worry too much about it being perfectly polished. You should speak in your authentic voice and understand that the rawness is actually a feature in this model.
And does interaction with the audience, is that important?
I think it's helpful, but it's not actually necessary. But this is a kind of conversational medium. And when people feel like you're not broadcasting to them from on high, but you're actually with them trying to figure out hard questions together, then they can trust you more.
And if Lionel broke into video, would you say he's a bit overdressed for Substack? Is that the Substack vibe?
I'm happy to wear shorts. It's okay.
As long as you're in the shirt and the tie above the desk. I think any clothes at all are probably well advised, and I think these clothes are more than adequate for Substack success.
It's a bit stuffy for Substack, isn't it? It's not.
Well, it depends on Lionel's brand. What does he wants to communicate? Gravitas and trustworthiness.
Have you heard the word? It begins with A, ends in Y.
Yes.
I never felt I had to do it through my clothes, but
Okay, so I'll work on the raw.
Well, that's really helpful, and it's been great to have you on, Hamish.
Thank you very much. Thank you, a great pleasure.
This interview was from the latest episode of Media Confidential, a podcast brought to you by Prospect Magazine. To listen to the full episode, click on the link below. And if you want full access to Prospect Magazine, go to prospectmagazine.co.uk.